Our speaker today is Miriam Tabatchnick. Miriam was born in Germany. She came to the United States, where she married her husband, who was a rabbi in Chicago, so she spent a lot of time in Chicago. Was a rabbi in Chicago. After he retired from the pulpit, he did extensive traveling to all parts of the world where he was teaching Judaic studies. And Miriam was fortunate enough to be able to join him on those travels. And she's here today to tell us about a few of the countries that she visited, as well as her early experiences. So with that, I will turn the podium over to Miriam.
Thank you, Judy. Oh, do you want this up here? Yeah. Thank you, and I also, how's that? Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, and I also would like to welcome you. I know it's a beautiful day outside, and I hope my life is interesting enough for you. It was interesting for me all these years. Anyhow, as Judy said, I was born in Berlin in 1926. I know the flyer said in the 30s, but I wish I had been in the 30s. Anyhow, it was in 26 I was born, and as a child, I didn't know much what's going on as far as politically. But then I started school, and I went to a public school. Now, in those days, we had some Jewish schools, but for some reason, my parents, who were Orthodox, but they sent me to a public school. And after, in the around 32, 33, 34, in school, we had to sit in the back row. All the Jewish children had to sit in the back. And then when Hitler came to power, the class would get up and make an allegiance to Hitler. And we had to get up, but we, of course, didn't say anything. After a little while later, we were thrown out of the school, and then I started going to a Jewish school. In the meantime, my parents, who originally came from Poland, both of them had come to Germany after the First World War. And they met in Berlin and got married. And my father was in the textile business. Those who were here last Shabbat and heard the guest speaker, Rabbi Cohn, his father was also in the textile, and we used to refer to the schmatter business, if you understand Yiddish. So during that time, of course, as Hitler was in power in the 35, 34, I mean, he came to power in 33, but 34, 35, it got worse. And those of you who have read the book, In the Island of the Beast by Larson, about Berlin, the American ambassador who came to Berlin with his family, and his daughter, as a matter of fact, she dated Nazis. But he, as much as he might have been a little bit of an anti-Semite, but he records all the incidents of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, the beatings that were handed out during that period in Germany. He left 37. He went back to America. Anyhow, this was 35 or so. And the question always is, why didn't you get out? And the answer is very simple. We couldn't because there was a quota system in every country. You could not just go, pick yourself up and go. And my father has an aunt who came to Germany in the 1920s. An aunt brought her over. I mean, not Germany, I'm sorry. Came to America. And she lived in America. We finally were able to get a hold of her. And she sponsored us to come to America. But being sponsored and getting out are two different stories. You had to wait. And you had a quota. And my father had what's called a stateless passport. It means that he didn't belong to any country. Why? Because when he was in Poland, he didn't want to serve in the Polish army. And that's when he went to Germany. And all these people got what they call stateless or stateless passports, and then couldn't leave. So we waited for our so-called quota. And as a matter of fact, my grandparents and my father's family and part of my mother's family, she had 6 siblings, and my father had a few siblings. Some were in Germany and some in Poland. And I had never, in all these years, by then I was about 10, 11, I'd never met my grandparents in Poland. I'd never been. For some reason, we were able to go in the beginning of 1937 to Poland and see my grandparents. One was my father's in a big city called Tarnów, and my mother was in a smaller town called Chanów. So we went to see them. But even in the train, when we crossed the border, when we went from Poland, in the train was all right, but in the German part, there was already discomfort, and I know we sort of sat on the side. We went by ourselves. And we came back, 1937. We still didn't get our paper, and we're still waiting for the quota. Here is 1938, and in the middle of the summer, I don't recall the exact date, there's a loud knocking on our door. We were in an apartment, and yelling, "Open up, SS or Gestapo." And my mother yelled, I had an older sister and a younger brother, so she had yelled at us, "Get into the other room, hide in the closet, get in there, and don't make a sound." So we did, and they came to get my father, because he was stateless, and they first took all those people. First they kept him somewhere nearby, and then they sent him to the camp, Buchenwald. You probably have heard about it. Now, in those days, when you went to a concentration camp, you were able to get out if you leave the country. So, but you have to prove or get a visa, and that's not very easy to prove that you can get a visa and leave, because you just couldn't get it. We were waiting, yes. So finally, I guess my aunt in America used some pull, some whatever, and she did get a visa for us. So my mother had to go to the Gestapo, show him the paper, and after 10 days in Buchenwald, he was able to get out. And he came home one night, and the next morning he had to leave, and he came to America. But we still we still had to wait for our papers. So we were lucky enough, we only had to wait a couple of weeks, or 3-4 weeks. And as a matter of fact, in those days, you can even take out stuff with you. We were able to take some stuff. And, but then we ended up in Belgium waiting for our ship. And my younger brother, who was only 3 years old, got emergency appendicitis. So he ended up in the hospital, and we missed our ship. So we ended up staying longer in Belgium, and finally we were able to leave, go to Le Havre, and then pick up our ship. We still remember Ile-de-France, and we went to America. Now I remember when we got into the harbor and we saw the Statue of Liberty. I know I was a kid, 12 years old, but still, it was sort of an excitement. You know, it represented something to us. Not that we didn't speak English, but it did mean something. And so we got to America. And before I forget, before I leave Berlin, I have to tell a little story, since Alfred and Hetty are here. Alfred and Hetty Cohen. He's right here, Alfred, a member of our congregation. Anyhow, when I came to skipping to the present, a couple years ago when I came to Longboat Key, somebody said to me, there's somebody here from Berlin. And I said, who? And he says, Alfred Cohn. So I said, who is he? I didn't know. So I saw him one day in the garage. And I went over to him and I said, I understand you're from Berlin. He said, yeah, I'm Berlin. So I said, where? He said, oh, East Berlin. So I said, well, I came from East Berlin too. So then he said, well, I lived on Lothomstrasse. So I said, well, so did I. I lived on Lothomstrasse. So then he said, well, I live number 4. So I said, well, I live number 2. So, but we never knew each other, but we were neighbors. It's a small world. So I thought I'd bring this in. Coming back to going to America. And I also want to mention that when we left, all our family, they were all still there. Some could get out. The only one who got out in 1939 were cousins. And I don't know if you've heard about the Kindertransport. It's a group from England they didn't take adults, they didn't take people, everything had a quota. But they did take 10,000 children. And these cousins, I call everybody cousin who's related, I don't know. Anyhow, so the 4 of them, there were 4 siblings, and they were able to come to London. And of course, the parents at first, it was a conflict with them to send their children by themselves, their little kids, to go when they don't know if they'll ever see them again. Anyhow, they did go, and of course they survived. And one cousin now lives in New York that I'm close with, and then we have 2 of them are still in London, and the youngest son was in Israel. He was the youngest, but he passed away. So the 4 of them survived. But that's family. And I also want the important, well, I'll come to it later. Anyhow, we are in New York, and my dad, at that point, what is he going to do to make a living? And Hayes was very active with new immigrants. And they sent us to a town called Braddock, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. They gave my dad a job, which he had no idea. He was always in business to do upholstery. I mean, he knew from upholstery like a man in the moon, but, we went. But the good part, we were only there a year, but the good part of it was I went to school there, and I learned English there. And it was, you wonder, how do you learn a language? Even now, I couldn't do it. You go to school, and all I knew is how to say, okay. So I go to school, they put me in the 1st grade, and I don't know, I always had by osmosis. I was there for a few weeks, and then I went to the grade 12-year-old, supposed to be, whatever it was. And of course, within a couple months before the year was over, I spoke English. And now even my parents learned English, and later years we did speak English in the house, except when they go out, all their friends were German-speaking, so they were all European Jews who came from Berlin. Then after a year, my father made some connection, and we went back to New York. And then we lived in New York until I got married. And we lived in New York from till 48, that's when I got married. And in New York, of course, it's a different world. You had, we lived what's called Washington Heights, that area. And many, many German Jews lived there. It's, Washington Heights was the German Jews area. My parents belonged to an Orthodox synagogue. They were Shomer Shabbos, and but not fanatic. So that's where I grew up. I went to school. I went to high school. I graduated high school. And then, of course, in those days, who can afford to go to college? But I was always pushing myself. And I went to City College night school. And I took courses. And I worked part-time during the day. And at night, I went to school. I went to City College. And you didn't mind taking the subway in the evening, I mean, you weren't afraid. So that's how I started off college. And then I also took a course at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And it's called the Friedlander courses. And it's like for lay people, take a course. And I remember taking a course, and I don't know, Joe, my husband, saw me. And he came over and he says, he was graduating that fall. I want to take you to the dance or the dinner that they had for the graduation class. And I said, well, I don't know you. So he said, well, your sister's going with one of the other students. So anyhow, I went. And to make a long story short, it didn't take long. This was just before Yontif, the holidays in 47. And he started his first pulpit. He graduated in Albany, New York. And when is a rabbi busiest? Of course, weekends. So he couldn't come very often to New York to see me. So he said, let's get married, it's easier. So we did. You know, I was young, and I don't know. I said, okay. So we got married, and we were married for almost 55 years before he passed away. And I would say happily married. We have three wonderful kids. My son, Emmanuel, my daughter, Rena, and my youngest daughter, Naomi. And there are 7 grandchildren, and they're all doing well. And the second one is married already. I mean, they're old enough, so it's time. And the second one is getting married this after Yontif. Anyhow, so that's sort of a little bit of a background of being in New York. And then I just want to go a little bit to the importance of family and friends before I go on the where we were, some of the countries that I visited. It's important for family and friends because, number one, all of us have lost so much family. And we don't have the connectedness anymore because a lot of them are gone. All my mother's sisters were killed. My father's family was killed. All my grandparents, except one grandfather, my mother's father, died of a heart attack. And the rest of them were killed in the Holocaust. And now, if we find a second cousin, third cousin, or anybody, we go to see them. And part of our travels, I'll come to it, but we would hear there's a cousin in Johannesburg. Our vacation, where would it be? We never have a question. Johannesburg. And we looked them up and make connection. South Africa, Johannesburg. And if you need, like I think we helped them with visas to come to America. Then we met family in Chicago. We get a call. Do you have family by the name of Tabatchnick in Argentina? So he said, I don't know. So we made connection. It turned out to be family. They were already in Chicago, but this part of the family was still in Argentina. Part was in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And we always went there. It's, I know it's even if, you don't have time to be real close, but you make the connection. And you see, and to me, travel is not anything. It's not just sightseeing, because sightseeing, you can go right in the United States. Traveling is also making connections with family and meeting people. And even if it's not your family, you meet somebody, like somebody will tell you, I have somebody. Now, I'm skipping, but I just wanted to also, we went once to Bangkok and Thailand. And we had a neighbor, and she said, I have a brother who's from Israel. He's doing some work in Bangkok, but I'll give you his name and address, call him. So we did, and immediately we got together. Then they invited us the next night, and they invited 8 other Israeli couples. Many Israelis would go for 2-3 years or do business in these countries. And that was it. We met this couple, and that's it. And I have little notebooks that I take notes. and I take like business cards like these, and I put them in the notebook. About 2 years ago, a little less, my granddaughter and her future husband, Neil, that she just got engaged to, came up, and he's all excited. My mother says that you met my grandparents, her parents. They came, his mother comes from Israel. And so I said, well, I don't know, it's 15, 20 years ago, I don't remember. Why don't I look in when I was there, and I checked when I was in Bangkok, and then I looked for the little notebook, and I said, look through, and as I opened my notebook, a card fell out, and he got all excited. Oh, that's my grandfather. So then he said, well, I said, well, look through the book, and I, wrote just a few words, what we did, and he looked through, and he saw what I wrote about his grandparents, and what, we met, and I said, look at my pictures, and maybe you'll find some pictures. And sure enough, he looked through the album from Bangkok, and yelled, there are my grandparents. I said, well, take the pictures, take everything, because it means more to you than to me. So anyhow, he did, and the grandparents have passed away since then. But what I'm trying to say, it's a small world, and you just don't know who you meet or what. It's like Alfred, our connection, or this part of the family, or when we went to London and we reconnected with the cousins. And in Israel, my husband had a lot of relatives in Israel, and we would look them up. Like this one cousin who originally came from Argentina, he became an Orthodox rabbi. The others are not. The others are secular. But so what I'm saying is, it's very important to have connectedness with people and your people, because if you don't, it's not the same. That's my thing. Anyhow, then, coming back to my days, anyhow, we got out of, we are in the United States now, and school, and I got married. And then my husband and I, we always liked traveling, and if he had a week off or a vacation for 2 weeks, so we would go somewhere. But we didn't take, we had, having 3 children, they were young, and you just can't leave them. So, but my son reminded me, he said, in 1960, you took us to Switzerland. There was a camp called Camp Usher in Bellabane, Switzerland. And it was a man who ran it after the war. He took people who were left after the Holocaust, and he took them in. In summertime, it became like a camp, and you had children from all over the world. So he, can you hear me? Is that right? Yeah. He took children from all over the world, and we thought it would be a great experience for them to meet children from France, and they did. One of the grandchildren had a roommate from France, and the other one from other countries. They were all different languages, and Manny was at the time 10 years, and Rena was about 8, and my youngest, Naomi, she was just going to go, in September she was going to be 5. And to this day, she tells me, how could you leave? She always used to look at her, the kid, her youngest, how could you leave us, for 2 weeks or 10 days, whatever it was, at that age? But now they have something to show off. And my son remembers yet, which is that we took him first to Spain before taking him to Switzerland, and we saw a group of Marrano Jews. Do you know what they are, the hidden Jews? Yeah. And I guess we had discussion, and they consider themselves Jewish now, openly Jewish. So which means he was 10, and he still remembers, even though they complained that we left him then. But anyhow, we did a little traveling, and then we came back and went. So that was one. then I'll take some of the, I was going to read you, but I don't know if you're interested, when we talk the importance of the state of Israel, and when people say, where should we have gone? Where could we have gone? You couldn't go anyplace because nobody would take it. And here, there's an article that Daniel Gordis wrote. I don't know if you ever read his articles. They're in the Israeli paper, Jerusalem Post or whatever. And but he is a professor and also writes. And he wrote about the Stroomer, the ship called the Stroomer. In 1941, out of Romania, there were 769 Jews who got originally permission to go to Palestine. And then the British got cold feet because the Arabs were there, and they thought, they didn't want to antagonize them. So they didn't. So there were all kinds of hardship. At first, they put them on a terrible ship. Then the ship was in a very bad condition, and they didn't want to go. So to fix it, they needed money. But they had already given all whatever they had, precious, before to get going. And now, so finally they had to give their wedding bands, anything, that they would fix the ship. But of course, Turkey wouldn't let him dock, and then the children, the British said, well, we'll let the children go. But nobody sent a ship. There was no way for them going. And they could never enter into any country. They had to be outside. And finally, they sent the ship to the Bosporus, and the Soviet sent bombs, and they bombed the ship. And all of them died except one. One survived, and he ended up in Palestine, and then he volunteered first he volunteered for the British. I wonder if I would do that after what they did. But anyhow, he volunteered for the British, and then, of course, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And so what I'm trying to say, it's not the fault of the people that they didn't go. They didn't see what's happening. They couldn't go. It wasn't easy to get papers to go anyplace. Now, the strange part is, reading a little bit, I'll talk to you about Iran in a few minutes. Iran did let people come in. There were Jews who went to Iran. I mean, in those days, I'm not talking now. Well, that's another story, but even now you have I'll get to it in a minute, Iran. Anyhow, that was it. Now, then the other thing is, with the travels, besides taking the children, then in '58 was our first trip to Israel. And that was for the 10th anniversary of the State of Israel. Then in the 60s, we went back to Israel, and my husband was asked by a group of ministers and educators, many of them non-Jews, to accompany them as a rabbi, to give them, that not as a tour guide, but as a rabbi for information. And here we went. And then it was in the 60s, so we ended up, we went to Sde Boker, where Ben-Gurion was in the kibbutz. He had retired there. And I think it was in the late 60s, I'm almost sure. Anyhow, so we somehow we got permission to go near there, and we knocked on his door, and Mrs. Ben-Gurion, have you got the picture? Oh, you didn't take it? Oh. Mrs. Ben-Gurion opened the door with her rollers in her hair. I mean, she's a funny lady, if you know anything about Paula. Yeah, Paula, I forgot her name. Anyhow, she opened the door, and we said, can we see Ben-Gurion? So she said, no, he's resting. You can't see him. So 2 minutes later, he comes down the stairs. And he said, what's happening? So we told him we'd like you to come out, and my husband told him to say a few words. So he did. He came out, and she came with him. Wait, I got to show you this. is a copy, so it's not very sharp, but it shows you Ben Gurion, Paula, and my husband. Mm-hmm. Can you see it? Yeah. Anyhow. So, and then he took us out, and he looked, he pointed to...
From the mic, Miriam.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, your voice.
Oh, my voice. I thought you said you couldn't. Yeah, okay. Is this better? Yes. Yeah, just speak up if you can't hear me. Anyhow, he came outside, and he pointed to the land, and you see there's some grass, and you see this blooming. The whole Negev will bloom like this. And of course, it is, as you know. And it was quite an experience. I know over the years we met Rabin and we met Peretz, but Ben Gurion was the most exciting experience. And so that was part of one of the trips to Israel. The other trip to Israel, I'm not giving you all, don't worry. There are about 26 or 27 times. So, but there was one in 1991, and that was just before the Gulf War was going to break out. We had a niece and nephew who had hot houses, and they grew tomatoes. And we went to see them, you know. Everybody said, "Aren't you afraid?" I said, "No, you know." We were never afraid. Maybe now I would be, but those days I wasn't. And we went to the to see Ross, and his name is Paul. I still call him Paul. It's Chaim in Israel. It's Chaim. And anyhow, so she said, "Don't stay, don't stay. The Gulf War is going to break out tomorrow or the next day or soon." So we had planned to go to Haifa from there. So I said, "All right." So we stayed, spent a little time with them, a couple hours, and then we left for Haifa. And what happened? The first thing when we got to Haifa, I also had cousins there. Yeah, we always make contact because that's why we go, not just to go to Haifa. And the first thing they took us to get gas masks. So we had to get a gas mask, learn how to put it on, and come back and go right away to a safe house because there must have been an alarm or something because I think a bomb was thrown the day before. So you just don't know. You know, you think in Gaza is more dangerous, but it turned out to be in Haifa. Anyhow, that was sort of the interesting trips. I mean, we many times, my family, simchas, and it was always a wonderful occasion. And we did a lot of sightseeing, too, in Israel. We went down to the Negev and all the way, we even went to Masada and all that. So we climbed Masada, as a matter of fact. In those days, you can climb it, or we could. Then the next trip, I'm not looking at my notes too much because it's easier if I just talk. If that's clear. Is that all right? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, Struma, I won't read you. I was going to read you the article about the Struma, but I don't think necessary. But Iran. Now, Iran, again, is how many people have been to Iran? I don't think too many. In 1976, we went to Iran. Why? Because we had also cousins from Israel, and they also were in London. I think they first lived in London, then Israel. And they were going to Tehran for business. You know, he was going to do business in Iran. This was 1976. The Shah was still in power. And then also in the community where my husband was a rabbi, there were a few people from Iran. And they had family. One had an uncle, one had a cousin still in Tehran, or also Isfahan. We went to Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz. These are the three big cities of Iran. And so in Tehran, we made contact, of course, with a family, and through them we met others. Here, I'll just wait. I just want to look quickly. Here, I won't give you all this stuff I have. Let's see. We went to see, and then we saw the Rabbi David Shofet. He was a rabbi there, and we saw one of the uncles from who owned a carpet store. And there was always somebody. And then we met people from the joint distribution. And we met people. It wasn't just going to see the city. We did see the city, too. But we also had connection with people. We saw the ghetto. And here, I'd like to just, I'd like to read to you, to know what's happening now. See, nowadays, in Iran, there are lots of Jews left, but they cannot have any connection to Israel. If they make a phone call or have anything, they are put in jail and probably beaten or killed, or I don't know. But as long as you're a religious Jew, and what happened these days, the Jews in Iran, there are about 25,000, are more religious. They also cover their head, and it's almost taking on the some of the religious habits, as long as they don't have any connection, as I said, with Israel. Here, I'll just read a little bit. If that's, am I all right? Yeah, not much more. While Jewish communities in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Egypt mostly vanished, Iran home is to 25 to some 35 Jews. Now it's half of what the Jews' population was before the revolution. Tehran has 11 functioning synagogues, many of them with Hebrew schools. It has 2 kosher restaurants, a Jewish hospital, an old age home, and a cemetery. There's a Jewish representative in the Iranian parliament. There's a Jewish library with 20,000 titles in reading room decorated with a photograph of the Ayatollah Khomeini. So in other words, they had political relationship. As I said before, as long as they were religious Jews, not Zionists. So, I don't know. So he, as a matter of fact, the Khomeini issued a fatwa that decreeing that the Jews were to be protected. I mean, they protected the Jews. Similar edicts are protecting Iran's tiny Christian minority too also. So I just thought a little bit, I won't read the whole thing. It should be bad. Here, now, from Iran, as I said, in all these places, we did meet people who are connected with the Jewish community, JDC, and some of the rabbis, some of the speakers, professors. So we always, and the nice part is, in all our travels, we were always invited to somebody's home. So it wasn't just going to a restaurant. I mean, it's just that's eating, but having the connection with the people who live there. And sometimes you had, like in China, you had some ministers, or in Japan, but it's different. So here, I'll jump. So my husband retired in 1990, and he was only 67 because he said, I want to retire so I can do what I want and do things. And he wanted to, he continued teaching and preaching. He was a very good teacher and preacher, both. And but he wanted to have the freedom of going and doing, not to be tied down. So we did. In 1990, through, there's a rabbi called Marvin Tokayer. I don't know, some of you have read his books, The Fugu Plan. Yeah, and he wrote a few others. Anyhow, he was a good friend of ours. And he made a connection for us in Kyoto, Japan. And there was a group, I think there were about 10,000, I'm not quite sure, Christian, evangelical Christians, who loved the Jews. And they had a little school, and they wanted somebody to teach for 4 weeks. I think it was 4 or 6 weeks. We were in Kyoto. And we went there, and there was a building where we stayed. They put us up, and it was called Beit Shalom. It was called the Beit Shalom. So we stayed there, and we even had like a little kitchen. And I think I must have taken a picture of it because I thought it was really something. Each, they had signs, they had some dishes, and there was a sign, meat, dairy, and parva. So where else can you find that? That was in, and they called it Beit Shalom. And when we first went to teach, or they gave a lecture they had the church and then the school. And on every Sunday, he would go to a different church in a different city. So we went to Kobe and other cities where he would give a lecture on a Sunday. And I'll never forget, we come there and they would applaud us when we came in. And I had like a uniform. I had a black suit and black shoes, and I had to take the shoes off anyhow, so it doesn't matter. But I said that was my church suit. And we went, and he, preached, that in a different. But at the school, it was very nice. When we first came there, and you went in, I felt they sang Hebrew songs. They welcomed us, the choir. They had a very good choir, and I thought I couldn't believe it was a church group. But as it turned out, of course it was. And one day I went in, I did see the cross, so I knew. It was a church. Anyhow, so that was quite an experience to be able to go all over Japan and go to these different churches. And he spoke. So it was always very good. And it was quite an experience to live there. It's not just going there, but when you live there, it's different. You're with the people, and there were quite a lot of people, ministers that we became friendly with. I won't. I got to watch my time. I had a time limit, so I better make it quick. Anyhow, so we would go to their home. If they invite you to their home, that's quite an honor, because Japanese are not that open with their home. They don't invite you so quickly to their home. So many of the ministers, their wives would invite us, and of course we met many people here in Shanghai, and I've got cards of people that we met, who are connected with Jewish organizations, Jewish study groups. So it was quite, so I won't, then of course we were in Russia, and there he taught too. They have a Jewish studies group, but the first time we went to Russia was in '88, and we went to see refuseniks. And this was really quite a thing. We got to the refuseniks' home, and he was celebrating. He had just gotten the letter that day saying he got his visa to go to America. And a year later, we get a call in Chicago, and he's settled in Chicago. So that's where he is right now. He's retired. But it was quite a coincidence. And the second time was in the 90s when we went to Russia. That's when a friend of ours who was into Yiddish, and he wanted him to teach for a few weeks in the school where they were studying Yiddish literature and Hebrew. And I won't go through the whole thing because it will take time. But I'm just telling you that there was quite a lot of study of Jewish in Hebrew, a lot of interest in Hebrew too, in Russia. And this was 1993. So these are the city. I won't go into China, Peking. My husband just gave 2 lectures in Peking University. But again, meeting the people and the professors, and so that made it. It's and there was always somebody who had dinner with or just get together with. So that was, and over the years, of course, we covered a lot of territory, many countries, and we went to Australia, New Zealand, and all of Europe. We used to tease when people say, "Where didn't you go?" No, where did you go? So I said, ask me where I didn't go. It's easier. So anyhow, we did cover the world. But my main point now is, again, to repeat myself, is the importance of making connectedness, to be part of the Jewish community. Don't isolate yourself. Just to be part, to have some association. And with that, I'll end. That if there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer, but I don't want to go way over my time. All our trips were on our own, except that time when we went with the ministers to Israel, and I think once to Russia the first time. But all our trips, when we went all over the world, we always traveled on our own. Now, we didn't go deluxe, and I'll never forget, we were at the Tivoli Garden one day and walking around, and we were young, so there was an elderly couple, our age. No, but she said, "Oh, I admire you. You're traveling while you can. Don't wait till you can't do it." So you travel, and you don't have to go deluxe. There are places. It's like when somebody says, "What Paris restaurant did you go?" So I said, "I don't remember any restaurants. We bought cheese and bread and fruit." So, I mean, when we were younger, I'm not talking about, yeah.
Did your husband teach when you were there at all? Or was it just...
Well, he taught only in certain, later on. In other words, he taught in Japan for 6 weeks. He taught in Russia. He gave a couple lectures in Beijing. And he gave, I think, in India also some lectures. But basically, not all the countries, no. Once in a while, like we were, I think, was it in Russia, we were invited to somebody's house, and they were going to have a group, and there was an Israeli speaker who didn't show up. So they called on my husband to give the lecture, so he did. But, yeah, Arlene?
In these Asian countries, I assume he was speaking to natives
Yes.
of that country,
Yes.
not just Jews.
No, natives.
So what I want to ask you is,
But mostly Jews in those countries.
Jews in those countries?
Pardon me? Yeah, that depends where you're talking about.
I'm just wondering if he spoke to any actual Japanese or Chinese, and what did they want to know about Judaism? If he did,
well, the Beit Shalom, these were Christian Japanese. Yeah, but they were Japanese. They were not Jew. So he would speak to them about, I mean, most of his lectures were based on Judaism versus whatever, or Bible. You know, he would explain certain things. And, yeah, so, yeah.
Miriam, yes. In follow-up to that question, what I was thinking of is in Japan in particular, when you were at Bet Shalom and they were Christian, what language did Rabbi Tabatchnick speak?
Well, he spoke in English, and he always had an interpreter. Time.
There was sentence and then...
Yeah, well, they would interpret. Some of them spoke and knew some Hebrew, and there were always a few people who knew English. And so that's, they were always interpreting some, there always somebody who speaks English. We didn't speak Japanese. I learned the Russian alphabet. The Japanese, I don't think I ever did. I did, though, take a lesson in calligraphy. It's a long time ago. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment that I had the good fortune of hearing Rabbi Tabatchnick in another foreign country called Longboat Key. He was a lecturer there for a while.
And June is the one who brought him.
And he was wonderful.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's he enjoyed it, and we enjoyed that kind. I mean, he didn't just, when we toured, it wasn't just touring. I mean, it was learning something and being part of a country or people where you pick up something more.
Last night I went to Berlin 36, one of the
from
the Jewish Film Society here at Federation, and I urge you all to go. Excuse me. My granddaughter Anna just returned from 5 days in Berlin, and I just wanted to mention to you, perhaps you know, I'm sure you do, that the climate has changed totally in Berlin.
Oh.
She felt extremely safe, very, very comfortable. She's with a group called Kivunim. They're young people, 18, 19 years old. There are 58 of them there. And they did Up Close Germany, a special group that was, a program that was designed for them. And they were made up of 20, 30-year-old German young people, not Jewish, of course, and their parents were Nazis. And they could not ask, these young German people could not ask their grandparents about their life. They would not speak about them. And their mothers and fathers, the parents, were children of these people from World War II. So that was difficult. But she said it was so beautiful how much they love Israel, how much they love the Jewish people. She felt so comfortable there. Wherever she went, she said there were policemen. I asked her, if they feel so safe there, you know. I mean, we have policemen here too, at our functions in our synagogues and Jewish places. But she just said it was wonderful, and she asked us to go. And she suggested very strongly that in Holocaust museums, that they now have a little place where they can show what's happening today in Germany, especially where she was.
Well, the German government in Berlin invited all those who were born in Berlin. This was in the 1990s. I don't know exact year offhand. And you can bring your spouse. So my husband and I went to Berlin, and I remember, since I spoke German, I started talking to people and you always get the feeling they tell you, I had nothing to do with it, as if they don't want to be connected at all. And my, then in over year 2000 something, I took my 2 daughters, went with me. And also they, they got to see. Alfred?
My parents and my brother and I, we were invited by the Berlin government to come back for a week, all full paid, airfare and everything. And we went back. My parents never went back. They were too upset about the Nazis did. But my brother and I, we went back, and we have been in Berlin. Subsequently, my wife and I, we went back to the synagogue in the Riekestraße, where I went to school, and the big synagogue. And Jewish life in Germany is a sorry state. Never mind, that's no anti-Semitism.
Oh, I'm sure you have
most of the people that are there now are either Russian, not Germans, and when you come to the synagogue, people come in jeans, and it's not what it used to be. But Jewish life in Berlin is still there. You had 140,000 Jews lived in Berlin before the war. Now there's a small community of maybe 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah, but then you also have the Russian. Don't you have 100,000?
Most of the Jews
are the Russians.
Now in Germany are from Russia. Because anybody in any Russian that could prove that his grandfather or everybody was German, and they could go to Germany and leave the Soviet Union even.
I have just one statement. This is my own feeling. When people say, I wouldn't go to Germany, I wouldn't give them a satisfaction. My theory is that you do go, and you don't give them the satisfaction that they can make the country Judenrein without Jews. And I think every Jew should be all over the world. We should have the freedom of living wherever we want to, and no country should make you feel that you can't go there because you're Jewish.
My wife and I had some very interesting experiences. One day we were there in Berlin, and we took a taxi going to the airport. So the taxi driver says to us, "You speak so fluent German. Are you Germans?" I said, "Yeah, we are Jews from America. We are born in Germany." So and when we came to pay the taxi, he refused to take money.
Isn't that something?
So
yes. No, that's... Okay, thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate it. Thank you.